Okay, we will be sewing on more closures or hardware by demonstrating how snaps operate. So I have here laid in front of me several different sizes of snaps. They do come in lots of different sizes. These are both very large snaps and medium-sized snaps. They come even smaller. You can see the two pieces of the snap. They do have to be sewn individually to work properly. You want to make sure that they snap together well first and that they are secure before you sew them on. Occasionally you might get a bent or broken snap, so always test your snaps before you take the time to sew them on. You do want to mark on your garment where you want these snaps to go, and you want to know the difference between them. So the flatter snap, you can see this here, it's very, very flat on the back side, and then it has this centerpiece that snaps into the opposite part. We often refer to this as the male snap. Then there is the other piece of the snap, the female snap, and the female snap is curvier. When it's flipped over, it kind of sort of resembles the male snap, but it is different. You can see the metal piece in the snap there and how it is rounded up around the edges. If you sew it on upside down, it definitely will not snap together with the other piece. So don't make that mistake and sew this on upside down. It wants to be sewn this way. These snaps are a little bit slippery when you first put them on your fabric, so you do have to hold onto them pretty tight as you're getting them sewn on, and then as you progress, as you sewn several of the holes, they will get easier and easier and more stabilized, and then you can let go a little bit. Snaps come in a variety of colors. I have both silver snaps and black snaps here. You do want to choose the proper color for what you're working on. Typically darker fabrics, black, etc., have black snaps, and then lighter fabrics, we use the silver. Also, if a garment already has some hardware or snaps on it, do make sure that you pay attention to that, and if you're just replacing one piece or one part of that, that you are matching what is already on there. So I'm going to push these others out of the way for the moment, and I will just show you how to put these on. You can notice that the smaller snap only has 4 holes in it. Even the very tiny snaps do that as well. The bigger snap that I showed you previously, we also call a whopper popper, has 6 holes in it. And those 6 holes make it more secure and more stable because it is quite large. So again, I've double threaded my thread. You can also quadruple thread, which means you're running 2 ends of the thread through the eye of the needle, pulling all 4 threads down evenly, and then tying them together as one. And that means every time you stitch, you have 4 threads running through. But at minimum, you want to do 2 threads running through for a stronger, better hold on your snap. So if you're familiar with sewing on buttons, some of the same principles apply. However, as I'm sewing on this, I do have, like I said, hold very tight onto this. It's very slippery and will wiggle away from you. But I'm going to start my snap from the top side of my fabric, so that is not the wrong side. I'm going to put my needle right next to the edge of the snap and then immediately up through that first hole. I will gently pull until my knot is at the base of my fabric. Again, in the same position, right outside the snap and immediately up through that hole. Kind of like a button, I want to make sure that I'm doing continuous stitches up and down through my fabric and through the edge of the snap at least 5 or 6 times to make it stable through each individual hole. So this snap with 4 holes will theoretically get 24 stitches through it. Once one of the holes is secure, Then I can move on to my next hole. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. Depending on the garment that you are working on and how many layers it has, you often want to hide what we call a traveling stitch, or moving to the next hole in between those layers of fabric. So if I am to hide this stitch, if this had more than one layer, I would put my needle underneath the snap. You can see that I'm going behind it and then up into the next hole. And then pulling through. So I do not see the thread that goes from one hole to another. Because I only have one layer here, I can see where that is. If I had multiple layers of fabric, I can sandwich that stitch in between those layers and never see it. And that's usually the goal. So then I will proceed with sewing like I did before, right next to the snap, right outside the snap, and immediately up, through that hole. Once I've completed the second hole, and I have plenty of stitches, it's nice and stable through there, then I'm going to travel to the next hole. And I'm going to show you what it looks like if I did not hide that traveling stitch like I did the first time, that stitch from one hole to another. If I do not hide my traveling stitch, that means that I'm placing my needle outside the next hole and immediately coming up through. And what will happen is the thread that is leaving this hole will sit on top of the snap. In situations where you may not have multiple layers to hide that thread through, then you can choose to do this. You will still see your individual sets of stitches, much like you did with the button on the opposite side of the fabric, but the traveling stitch could sit on the snap itself. And it's good if you don't have other things in your way. Again, if I'm going to travel to my next hole, I can put my needle right here. If I were to hide it, I would have dived underneath that snap instead of coming to the next hole immediately. And occasionally with a double thread, you will find that one thread pulls through well, the other does not behave. So don't be afraid to tug like I am and adjust those threads. It's giving me a lot of trouble. There it goes. And when I've completed this hole, which I'm almost done, then I'm ready to tie my knot. So it's important to remember that right now my thread is coming up through the hole in the snap. I obviously cannot take a stitch inside of that hole, so I will come outside of the snap to be able to tie a knot. But I cannot use the loop that is forming right now. Why not? Well, that's too far of a jump, especially over the middle of the snap, to create the knot. So I have to pull until it's all the way flat. And once I'm outside the snap and my thread is coming out from outside the snap, then I make another stitch. And the loop that is now forming can be what I tie with. Needle in the edge of the loop, twist, and pull until it's flat. So my male snap is now sewn on securely. I would place my female snap in its correct position, usually on another piece of the garment. So we're often closing garments with this, and this would be on another side of the garment. And I would sew it exactly the same way. I would go each individual hole around until I end and tie it off in much the same way that I did the male.